Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Fuhrman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. When the books are written about 2020, there will most certainly be chapters entitled Trauma, Anger, Loss, and Grief. Certainly, those experiences existed before and will exist after, but the energy of 2020 seemed to exacerbate them. As we move forward, what tools may we use to get beyond the upsets, the losses, and trauma? Is there a model and exercises we may follow to heal and to move on? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Dr. Alexandra Chauran, experienced the full extent of these in her life 5 years before 2020 and knows how to work through the worst that life may throw at us. Dr. Alexandra Chauran received a master's degree in teaching from Seattle University and a doctorate from Valdosta State University. She's the author of 14 books, including 365 Ways to Develop Your Psychic Ability, 365 Ways to Strengthen Your Spirituality, and Clearing Clutter. She's been interviewed on National Public Radio and other major media outlets. Her website is seepsychic.com, and she joins me this week to discuss her path and her new book, Getting Through It: Reclaim and Rebuild Your Life After Adversity, Change, and Trauma. Please welcome to Vox Novus, Dr. Alexandra Chauran. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. May I refer to you as Alex during the course of the interview?
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, Alex, please share with our listeners your path in life before the events of 2015.
Before 2015, I felt like my life was pretty good. I owned 2 homes. I was running a very successful fortune-telling business. I had 2 beautiful children, and I was enrolled in my doctoral degree program. So it was pretty much the dream life at that time. I felt like I built it strong and tall, but sometimes that turns out to be a house of cards.
and tell us about your spiritual practice at that time.
At that time, I was and still am the queen of a coven. So I practice Wicca, which, for those of you who don't know, is an earth-based spirituality movement that is polytheistic in nature. And so I was running a group of that sort, and I still am, and they're like family to me. Very fulfilling for me.
Wonderful. What happened in 2015 that changed everything for you?
Well, it was kind of a sob story of a few years at that point. In 2015, I was diagnosed with cancer quite suddenly, which was very odd for me because I was very healthy. I eat vegan. I was a marathon runner. I had just completed the Tough Mudder, which is an obstacle course run. So I thought I was top of the world healthy. I weightlifted 3 days a week. And unfortunately, breast cancer can strike anyone. And it turned out that I had an advanced and aggressive form of breast cancer.
And what happened?
After that, I had to go through all of the regular mainstream treatments, which included 5 months of chemotherapy, 36 treatments of radiation. I had surgery to remove my breasts, both of them, and muscle tissue underneath, as well as 11 lymph nodes and my ovaries. That
by itself was highly traumatic. But what else happened?
Well, after that, unfortunately, my ex-husband now, left me. And we had been together for 14 years, so I was extremely heartbroken and devastated. He was the love of my life.
I'm so sorry. What was that like, losing him that way?
It was very startling and shocking. I certainly did not expect it to go that way. I never expected to have a divorce. And he unfortunately ran off with a very good friend of mine, which also was traumatic for me because they were both a very big part of my life. And when 2 people who are a big part of your landscape disappear, essentially, it can feel like the whole world has withdrawn from you, which wasn't the case, but that's certainly how I felt at the time.
Now, let's talk about some of the other things in your life. You refer to yourself as a semi-retired fortune teller. Why semi-retired?
It's semi-retired because I'm spending more of my time connecting with my family, writing my books, and playing and recreating, which I didn't before cancer and the divorce. But it's semi-retired because I can't give up on my beloved clients, and they won't give up on me. So I'm still there for them. I'm just not out seeking new clients right now. I'm not advertising, if you will.
And what do you do during the course of those sessions?
During the course of those sessions, I often use divination tools. I use them as sort of a one-on-one, sort of almost like a counseling tool, except for it's not really counseling like therapy. It's more of a spiritual counseling sort of thing. And so I connect with people and help them discover things that they need to discover. I empower them with choices that they can make, and I confirm the things that they already know. That's a big one.
Now, what I didn't know about you, and I found out when I went to your website, is that you are a master of poker. Tell us about that.
Well, it's very interesting. That is also something I discovered after cancer. And it's amazing what kind of weird things can heal you from trauma. And something about poker is that it's a combination of skill and luck. And experiencing the ups and downs of poker playing helped me deal psychologically with the ups and downs of my life and really helped me work through that trauma. Of course, it's an ongoing process. I'm not going to say I'm 100% healed, but I will say that poker has been instrumental in helping me with that.
Now, I know that if someone is a card counter, for example, you're not allowed to go into a casino, and I know you're not a card counter, but do you use your intuition at all?
Definitely use my intuition. Card counting is something that's used in blackjack, not in poker, because each poker hand, the deck is reshuffled, so you can't count the cards.
Okay.
But intuition is definitely a big part of poker, and I believe that all of the best poker players are very intuitive.
And you've been in tournaments.
Yes. Yes, they're quite fun.
That's wonderful.
I've been in some big ones, and they've been very exciting high points in my life. And of course, I've met amazing friends and people along the way.
Wonderful. Now, please share with our listeners about some of your earlier books.
All right. There's 14 of my earlier books written in the front of this book, but I actually have published about 26. But these are ones that are still in print with this particular publisher. I've written a couple books you mentioned at the beginning. The 365 Ways books are sort of like daily devotional type learning books. I've also written about other forms of fortune telling like clairvoyance and crystal ball reading and rune reading and palmistry. I've written some things about the idea of magic and the surrounding mythos of that, such as fairies and elementals for beginners, and also the spirit boards for beginners. And Have You Been Hexed is a really important book to me because there are many people in this world who suffer grave misfortune, and I wanted to help free them from that in a bigger way than just answering their emails. And I've also written a lot about being a professional fortune teller because I believe that it's a really fulfilling course of life to take, and I like to help aid people that are along that path.
You also wrote a book about clearing clutter. Tell us about that.
Yes, Clearing Clutter was a really fun book. I think I usually advertise it as one of my less woo-woo books, for those friends who want to gift it to a family member who's new to my writing. But it is a little bit woo-woo because it's about clearing clutter in both your physical space, but also your mind and your spirit. And it's about simplifying your life, and it's about finding ways to let go, which is, of course, a big theme in my new book, Getting Through It.
There's an old expression, nature abhors a vacuum. How important is it to get rid of stuff that's been cluttering your life?
It's pretty vital in order to make room for new things that you want to have. A therapist might tell you, one of my therapists told me after I had suffered those losses of my best friend and my husband, she told me that the first step in regaining trust was to make room in my life for new people that I could trust. And that was definitely a big step toward my healing.
Absolutely. We have a tendency to hold on to things, and some people actually are, I forget the expression, what do they call those? The word
Hoarders.
Hoarders, that's it. I couldn't think of hoarders for a second. And I've had some friends who've had houses that were completely filled and have helped them to empty them out. And once the houses were empty, new opportunities, new careers, new relationships, a lot of new things ensued when you make that space.
Absolutely. And although I never was a hoarder of possessions, I think I was definitely a people hoarder because I would keep people in my life long after they proved to be toxic.
That's something I think we all have in common with you, that there's a tendency to do that. And I don't know why we do. Why do we do that? Why do you think we do that?
I think for me, this may be different for other people, but for me, it was part of a lack of self-confidence. I wanted to be able to give something to every relationship. I wanted to be a valuable jewel in the relationship. So I would actually seek out people who were very needy because I thought, hey, I'm going to add value to this relationship. I'm going to lift this person up in their life. I'm going to help them achieve their goals and dreams and expectations. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case with many of these people. Many of these people didn't want the same outcomes that I hoped for them. And I realized that I had to start valuing what I bring to a relationship and to a friendship just as inherently myself, and valuing my companionship in order to take value back in return.
Absolutely. We're going to talk a little bit about helper personalities in a bit. Why did you write Getting Through It? What was your inspiration behind it?
Well, actually, my editor, bless her heart, I've been working with her since 2009 at Llewellyn Worldwide. It's a wonderful publisher. And my editor asked me to write that book because she's also my friend, and she felt impressed at how I was making it through cancer and still maintaining a positive attitude. And she said, you could really help a lot of people with this. And I would really love you to make a book to share some of your wisdom. And I did. It was one of the longest writing times I've ever spent writing a book. I'm a very fast writer. It usually takes me about 3 months. But this one took me 2 years to write. I really wanted to dig deep, and I wanted to help others with it. It's one of the most important books I've ever written, for sure.
Just share with our listeners a little bit about your writing process, because you are such a prolific writer.
Yeah, actually, my writing process started with a fun annual event called NaNoWriMo. It stands for National Novel Writing Month. And in the month of November, many, many, many people take part in attempting to write a novel. And the process for this is that the novel is defined as a book containing 50,000 words. So you can write and just get all your ideas spilled out on the paper, and maybe it's garbage, but that's for the editing process, right? The writing process is about putting the words to the page. And so I would just set myself a writing goal of words to write in the day, and I still do that with my books. And so typically I can get a book done in 3 months if I'm writing casually and I don't work on weekends. But in National Novel Writing Month, people attempt to finish it all within the month of November.
Wow. That sounds like a real commitment.
And my first published book was a NaNoWriMo project, and so I wrote it all in 1 month.
Wow,
and
that's
that was
wonderful.
crystal ball readings for beginners.
That's wonderful. You based your book, Getting Through It, upon Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 Stages of Grief model. For those not familiar with it, what are the 5 stages of grief, and why did you choose this model?
Well, the 5 stages of grief are something that's actually pretty prevalent in popular culture. Maybe you've heard of these stages of grief as being denial, and then anger and bargaining, sadness, and finally acceptance. And I think that even though these stages of grief are not psychologically accurate, they've been proven to be inaccurate in scientific literature, they're still pretty prevalent in society. And a lot of people who suffer great loss feel almost a sense of compulsion or duty to get through these stages and come out the other side as some kind of whole person, the same way that they were before the process. And I decided to use these models because I know people are looking out for them in themselves. And I wanted to help people understand that the journey is more like a spiral. You're going to hit these feelings in these stages over and over again. And as you spiral upward and outward out of your grief. And the journey never really ends. It's not like you come out the other side and say, whoa, that was a big car wash. Instead, you have to transform during the process and really dig your teeth into the process.
There's an old and perhaps very trite expression, denial is not a river in Egypt. What is denial, and why is this so often the first response to terrible news?
Denial is the idea that you can just ignore the problem and try to maintain that sense of normalcy. It's the act of not letting go. It's clinging to the idea that no, 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 this is not happening. And this stage is so prevalent because we don't want to let go. We don't want to say that our lives are going to be changed forever and that nothing is ever going to be the same again. It's hard to tear ourselves away from our old life. And so that is why denial is so prevalent. I remember when I was diagnosed with cancer, I went through a brief period where I thought, maybe I'm just making all of this up for attention. And that would be amazing. I could wake up in a mental hospital the next day and it would be great. But unfortunately, I really did have cancer and I had to come to terms with that.
And denial doesn't have to necessarily apply just to illness or to the loss of a loved one, but it also breaking up of a relationship, a loss of a job. There are many things that can trigger this.
Yes, absolutely. Any loss can trigger this. Anything that is going to transform your life from the way it was to something completely different that you can't change it back.
Is there a societal level of denial occurring right now based upon the events of 2020 and just recently in 2021?
Oh, absolutely. I think that people are going to be analyzing the research in the changes in our economies, the changes in our social structures, the changes in civilization at large. We can't really go back to the way the world once was, but there's certainly going to be a push for that, especially from corporations who want to have their workers return to the normal cogs in the machine that they once were.
And how much did media play a part in creating this?
I think that media helps people in some ways to digest information, but in other ways, that doom scrolling, as we call it nowadays, is it can be almost like you're taking in a constant diet of tragedy and transforming your life into that tragedy. And paradoxically, that can be almost comforting because it feels like you're moving through this horrible space while you're safe in your living room, taking in this media, and you're going to come out the other side and pretend like life is normal. But, media plays a role in people continuing to kind of go through back and forth through these different feelings without doing the work needing to process them.
I grew up in the 1950s and 1960s, and certainly we had our share of tragedy and horrible things happen. The assassination of President Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and later on Robert Kennedy, and all of the things associated with the Vietnam War. But I don't think that this generation has had anything like this, the current generation, anything like this to really look at. Is this something that parents are going to have to worry about with their kids?
I think it's always going to be something in human nature, and it's something that needs to be addressed and taught instead of just hoping it's going to be part of the human condition that just disappears or gets better.
Yeah, and so perhaps on the school level, this is something that can be approached.
Absolutely, and definitely at the family level. I think that The tendency is to sort of speak down to children and not treat them like the developing adults that they will be. But I think that children can handle a lot more abstract concepts surrounding societal collective trauma than we give them credit for.
My guest is Dr. Alexandra Chauran. She's the author of Getting Through It, Reclaim and Rebuild Your Life After Adversity, Change, or Trauma. Alex, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and your work.
You can get my books wherever books are sold. I encourage you to try, if you can, if you're not in lockdown, to patronize your favorite independent bookstore and help support your local bookstores during this time. But of course, you can also buy my book on Amazon and all those other big book sources that you can. You can find me online, as he said, at seepsychic.com, or also by going directly to my Twitch channel, which is titled Queen of Diamonds.
And we'll be back with more of Alexandra Chauran after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes. Co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
America, your children have an amazing superpower. That's right. They can help save lives by simply washing their hands. Just 20 seconds of thorough hand washing after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside can help fight against the dastardly spread of germs. Armed with only soap and water and hands, your superhero can protect you, your family, and everyone out there in America land. Amazing! Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Coping-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
I'm Kathy Williams, host of Sexy Mom Abundant Life radio show on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. On the show, we explore living abundantly in every area of your life. Ways to let go of limiting patterns and beliefs and to step into the flow of creativity and possibility, knowing you are supported by the universe.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Dr. Alexandra Chauran. She's the author of Getting Through It, Reclaim and Rebuild Your Life After Adversity, Change, or Trauma. Alex, you discuss being a helper personality, something that I totally identify with. Why is it that we helpers have so much difficulty in asking for what we need?
I think it's because we don't want to be a burden on others, and we want to add value to every relationship we form in life, whether it's the grocery store clerk or a best friend. We want to be the ones benefiting the relationship and giving them the good deal and taking as little as we can from that relationship.
And how do we turn that around? You know, there's an old Moody Blues song question, and there's a line that says, when you stop and think about it, you won't believe it's true that all the love you've been giving has all been meant for you.
I think it's an issue of trust deep down at the heart of it. An idea that we can't trust our own self-value, and we can't trust that other people will be there to catch us. It's also sort of a form of control as well. And so there's kind of two aspects of the self that need to be worked upon, which is trust, and one is self-esteem.
How may we approach denial and let it go?
Approaching denial and letting it go can be done in many different ways. When I originally wrote the book, Getting Through It, I wrote it as one of those 365 ways books, a devotional, so that you could do a different exercise every single day. And those exercises are still in there. I just had to reorganize the book because I realized that it could be more helpful in this format where people could jump around. And I think that there's many ways people can do it, but all of them have to do with a deep philosophical underpinning of what we call Stoic wisdom. I noticed you have a quote in your Skype status that says, "Heaven is in your mind." And that is an essential Stoic wisdom, which is that our external events are not what define us. What defines us is how we react to those events and what is within. And all of this is a self-discovery.
Can you give us a couple of examples of exercises for this?
Sure. I mean, some of them are extremely basic, like breath work. Learning how to do deep breathing actually changes your brain chemistry. And people can be very resistant to this. When you're angry, for example, you want to stay angry naturally. And it's hard to sit down and start using some of those coping skills. So I have basic things like breath work, but I also have other things because people are different. You know, some people may respond to visual art and creating, say, a painting or drawing, personifying their inner enemies, while other people may respond more to music or to connecting with nature, vitamin nature. So I actually use many, many different methods throughout this book because I know some of them won't work for everyone, and I wanted to include something for everyone.
And as we know that there is no one way to grieve, each way is an individual process for different people, isn't it?
Correct. There's no wrong way to grieve.
No wrong way to grieve, no right way to grieve. It's just whatever works for you.
Yeah.
And so consequently, these exercises are adapted on that basis.
Absolutely, especially since some of the losses, like I said, you have to make peace with the fact that things aren't going to be the same again. And I wrote this book for some people who won't be recovering from whatever is happening to them. For example, somebody with a terminal case of cancer, or somebody who is going through a divorce that they know they're never going to get back together with their ex. I wanted to make it complete to include those people so that, you know, the book doesn't end on a sunny note where everything's back to normal.
Anger, as you said, is the second stage, and there are a lot of angry folks out there right now. In Getting Through It, you say that anger should not displace kindness. What do we need to know about anger?
I think the most important thing to know about anger is what in the psychological field we call metacognition. And what metacognition is it's thinking about thinking. And when we think about anger, we think about it as a negative emotion. In fact, even our language describes it as a dangerous thing. It can be explosive. It can be fiery. But what we need to know about anger is that our negative metacognition, our thoughts about how anger is bad and wrong, actually affect the way we can process through it. So it's more important to start forgiving yourself for anger and start thinking about anger in a different way, thinking about how it motivates people towards change, thinking about how it helps us clarify our motives and understandings, and embracing anger so that you can fully process it.
Yeah, there's an old expression about anger and in particular about hatred that says hatred is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Exactly.
And anger's the same way.
Yes, anger can turn out to be negative because of the behaviors that come out of that anger. The emotion itself is not wrong. One just has to figure out how to use that anger instead of stuffing it down.
And in our anger, how can we express kindness?
In our anger, we can express kindness by allowing ourselves to feel that anger and finding ways to self-soothe instead of expecting someone else to right the wrongs and become a better person.
Bargaining is the next stage. With whom are we bargaining?
Ourselves, largely. Although we can project that onto others, such as our doctors or our ex-spouse, ultimately we're bargaining with ourselves and with our divine ideas of self, perhaps a higher self or a god or goddess.
Give us an example of bargaining.
I think an example of bargaining would be the control that people try to take over their problems. For example, I always keep going back to cancer because it was a big experience. So I know that's not for everyone. But one thing that people do when they hear somebody has cancer is they start asking, well, did you smoke? Are you eating? You should switch to a plant-based diet, right? And a lot of cancer sufferers will change their diet immediately, even though the research doesn't say that does anything. And the reason is, for the people who don't have cancer, they're saying that because they want to make a bargain with the universe about how that's not going to happen to them. Like, oh, I'm never going to get cancer because I don't smoke. Oh, I'm never going to get cancer because I eat a plant-based diet. And that person over there smoked and didn't eat a plant-based diet. So, of course, they got cancer, and that's never going to happen to me, right? And that's a form of bargaining. And likewise, the cancer patient may say, oh, gosh, I have no control over this process. I have to have chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. But what I can do is stop eating sugar because I feel like that's feeding my cancer, and now I'm in control, right?
How may we bargain positively?
I think we can bargain positively by simply being self-aware when bargaining. For example, it's not bad to quit sugar, even if it doesn't do anything at all to help the cancer progression. We can just acknowledge and say, yes, these are some ways in which I'm taking control of my life. I'm not going to fool myself with this. I'm still going to let the people who are more knowledgeable take charge, but I'm going to partner with those people to give myself a sense of control. For example, I'm going to tell my doctor I'm switching to a low sugar diet and ask my doctor what other ways I can take control of this journey.
What are some of the exercises that you offer in the section on bargaining?
Let's see. I got to remember this one now. I think that in the section on bargaining, I try and give examples of how we need to embrace change. A lot of this is, again, a sort of philosophical shift where you understand that change is always happening in the world. I also draw attention to cultures where change is met with this idea of spiritual retreat. In some cultures, we go on the spiritual sojourn. We leave our house and we seek our fortune, and that's the way we meet change. But in our culture, we don't. We try and keep moving society along the same as it's always been. So I encourage people to take their own sort of spiritual retreat, even if they can't literally go anywhere, and start processing those bargains within their own minds and allow themselves to be that spiritual wanderer who mythologically goes out and finds wisdom and then comes back to society and releases that wisdom to all. The myth of the guy who has the golden beans and climbs the beanstalk. We are all that traveler when we go through a change that no one else is going through, and we can come back with wisdom.
And as you mentioned, especially now with physical separation, it may be very difficult for people to physically leave their homes and go on that spiritual journey. How can they do it within the confines of their homes?
Within the confines of your homes, I just wanted to speak to this. Since I was writing this book for example, terminal cancer patients and other people who wouldn't be able to physically leave their bed, much less their home, I did try to include exercises that anyone could do from their bed. And so part of this can be mental journeys, or as we call it, astral travel, where we travel to a different spiritual plane and actually create our own little safe space, our happy place. For example, my therapist, while I was going through some hard times, told me to recreate a place in my mind. In this case, it was a real place, not a safe space that I created all on my own. She asked me to recreate a space that I really felt good in and to just really use all of my senses, hear the sounds, smell the smells, all of that. And I imagined running along the seawall in Vancouver, British Columbia, because that's my favorite place. And I would just, even when I was at my sickest, I couldn't get out of bed, I'd close my eyes and I'd hear the boats knocking together and the seagulls, and I would smell the sea air. And when I was healthy and well afterwards, the first run I took along the seawall was a very spiritual experience for me. And I did end up crying and praying during that run. I must have looked the maniac.
So visualization, meditation, what about those who can do things like yoga and other exercises?
Oh, absolutely. If you do have the physical ability to do more physical things, that can be extremely transformative. I just mentioned running, and that's a big meditative thing for me. When I feel angry, I go for a run and I come back having processed that anger and also come up with healing ideas. And I think that yoga can be especially good. Martial arts are an amazing mental training. Again, breath work, there can be very, very difficult breathing meditations that some people won't be able to do if they have lung cancer. But if you have the physical ability to do them, they can change your brain state like that.
And what are some of the breathing techniques that people can employ?
Well, the most basic one that is most common is square breathing. And that's taking an inward breath for 4 counts, holding it for 4 counts, breathing out for 4 counts, and then holding the empty lungs for 4 counts. And I often advise new people to use your heartbeat as the count, because then you will naturally slow your own heart rate as you slow your breathing. And so that's a very powerful method. It's very basic. Many people know about it. It's not a secret of the universe that only I hold, but it works.
And also, as part of the spiritual journey, people can just get books that they really love and read them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different ways to process what's going on in yourself and take control of your journey.
What about things like connecting with others of same spiritual bent? How important is that?
That can be really vital. It's not 100% vital, of course, because some people cannot physically connect with others of their spiritual bent. But fellowship is something that can be healing to many. And part of that is that some people need to be able to express to others their feelings and have their feelings and ideas reflected back to them. And so spiritual fellowship, spiritual kinship can be really healing. That's why so many people are having Zoom church meetings and things like that. But if you can't connect with your spiritual peers, then you can do so by creating art or by writing. Those are other ways to express yourself that don't need to be taken in by another.
Tell us a little bit about writing and doing art. How do you recommend people do that?
Well, again, this is going to vary based on the person. Some people are very comfortable with some artistic media. Other people are not. What I advise is similarly to what I talked about earlier, where you write just for the word count and you don't care what happens on the page. You can do the same thing with other forms of art, such as song making, music making. There is even a music therapy at the hospital local to me. And also visual art, just creating the art without allowing yourself to be constrained by how it's going to appear to others, because it doesn't have to appear to others.
You know, it's really interesting. I am not an artist. I could not draw to save my life, literally. But a friend of mine recently suggested that during the confines of COVID and so on, that I get pieces of paper and just get some paint, some watercolors, and just start putting things down. And I was amazed it would actually float when I did that, when I allowed myself that process.
Absolutely. I did the same process. I, too, am not a visual artist, so I wouldn't be able to sell my works. But during the pandemic, I found out about a Japanese myth called Amabie, and that is a spiritual creature that has specific description. It has long hairs and a duck beak and 3 mermaid-type tails. And the idea in the myth is that you draw this creature and you show the picture to someone else, and it creates healing from infections, epidemics in the world. And so I thought, maybe I'll just draw an Amabie every single day. And so I, too, went through that process, just like as you described.
Wonderful. My guest is Dr. Alexandra Chauran. She's author of Getting Through It, Reclaim and Rebuild Your Life After Adversity, Change Your Trauma. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose: to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others, and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living, a chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me, and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Dr. Alexandra Chauran. She's the author of Getting Through It, Reclaim and Rebuild Your Life After Adversity, Change, or Trauma. You call the stage of sadness the black dog. Why?
That was inspired by a reading, a divination reading that I received from a Vodou practitioner. I went to have essentially my shells read. They do a special divination method using shells. And the woman told me about death in the form of a black dog, of sadness. And she said, death is like a hungry dog. You don't want to offer it food. And for some reason, that metaphor stuck with me, and I wanted to continue that metaphor of the idea that sadness can be like an insatiable monster.
Is sadness helpful in healing?
Absolutely. Just like every other emotion that we feel, sadness itself is not bad at all. The metacognition, or feeling about feelings that we should have about sadness, is that it's okay to feel, and it's wonderful to do so. And you just have to mind your behaviors and try to process that sadness instead of avoiding it or stuffing it down.
And what exercises do you offer for processing sadness?
There's a lot to do to process sadness, that's for sure. And that's something I just want to offer a brief aside that in my book, I can't treat clinical depression in any way. And there are some forms of sadness that go beyond the blues. And in those cases, you need to seek help from a professional. But I do try to help people stop seeking external validation, rather, and finding their own internal validation, because sadness can come on, especially feeling like a burden or feeling not valued to others. And I think that's happening a lot this year, honestly, for people, because we don't get the external validation of seeing the smiling faces of all the people that we used to see every day. And it can feel very isolating and cause a certain sort of sadness that colors the lives of everyone who has survived 2020. And so I think a lot of what I have in that chapter has to do with self-care and has to do with finding your own inner cheerleader, in a sense, and helping you take away that external validation, letting go of that external validation, and finding that acceptance within yourself. So I have some other exercises. Some of them tend towards the magical. I have a bind rune, which is a sort of an image that is magical for helping to take away that blues. And again, I have other methods that are very much built for different types of people, having things work for them in different types of ways.
The final stage is acceptance. How may acceptance be a road to recovery?
Well, again, I want to emphasize that the journey is more like a spiral. So it's not like acceptance is some kind of end goal that you reach and then you put a big acceptance trophy on your mantle and you're done with the whole journey. Instead, acceptance starts to come in bits and pieces. Reclaiming your life, saying that your life is your own, has to happen in little bits and pieces. Sometimes that can start with just little bits of daily life. And sometimes that can start with your ideas about how you're planning your future. Because just like with cancer patients, people who are experiencing a global pandemic can't necessarily plan for the future. You can't say, oh yeah, I'm going to have a wedding in the summer and everybody's going to attend, right? So that changes your world when you can't plan for a specific future outcome. Instead, you have to look within and say, regardless of outcome, I accept me and who I am now in this moment and who I will be.
Absolutely. How important is sharing our story in the process of healing?
Again, this is something that differs for many people. Sorry, I keep saying that, but it's so true, because you don't necessarily have to share what's going on inside in order to process through those feelings. However, the help that you can offer others who are going through the same thing can be extraordinarily healing and can give a sense of purpose in a world that may seem entirely purposeless.
Absolutely. And even journaling for ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. Creating art, creating any sort of emotional creation, even if you don't show it to anyone on the planet, is still a useful activity.
After all the stages, you offer us ways to pick up the pieces. What are some of those ways?
Well, some of those ways, again, are internal ways that you can begin to reframe your journey. And, again, art therapy, such as relaxing slow music, dancing, using sacred movement, processing your feelings through things that you might see a therapist offer you, like meditations that allow you to kind of unwrap the feelings and see what feelings are underneath. One of the things that happens when people go through a traumatic event is that life doesn't put on pause while you're going through that traumatic event. Life keeps moving on. And so you have to make time to process that trauma. And so this chapter is all about using some of these exercises like free writing and channeling, confronting and releasing trauma, simple practices like making lists of what is weighing heavily on your heart, these are things that you have to really proactively do. You can't just say, okay, well, that chapter's over with. I'm closing that chapter and moving on.
So we never really closed the chapters, but we were able to sort of move forward from them.
Exactly. And anyone who's experienced the death of a loved one can certainly attest to that. The grief does not just disappear. 12 years down the line, you're not going to completely not feel any of those feelings, that sadness. Sometimes those feelings will still catch you off guard. But that doesn't mean we can't process and change ourselves through that. Basically, it's not optional to experience failure and loss, but it is optional to learn from failure and loss.
During the last break, you and I were discussing offline about what your Skype username is, Earthshod, and the Earthshod concept. What is about Earthshod for our listeners?
It's about living barefoot. There's a wonderful organization called the Society for Barefoot Living that can certainly shed some light on that. And you mentioned earthing, which is a spiritual concept of connection to the earth's energies. I certainly include some grounding meditations within my book, and I think those are incredibly vital to a lot of people in life. If you don't learn how to ground, sometimes you will be overwhelmed by the feelings, especially feelings from others that can creep into your life and become your burden.
Is there a way that we may find the new normal?
The new normal is going to be different for everyone because everyone has suffered different losses. Through 2020, for example, some people are suffering compounding losses, which is, the loss of a home, perhaps the loss of a job, the loss of their social community, their faith community connection. They might lose a spouse during this time, or they may even lose a beloved grandmother or grandfather to the disease. And picking up those pieces and creating a new normal is going to have to look different from your life before. But the trick is you can't know what it looks like. And that's the scary thing. You have to let go of control of making the life look exactly the way that you want it, and instead dig your teeth into the process.
Absolutely. I can share just my personal experience that many of the listeners know. Last January of 2020, my mom passed away. The month after, a very, very dear friend passed away. And in my capacity as an interfaith minister, I do funerals. And when it comes to family and very close friends, you do the funeral, but you still don't stop the grief process for yourself. In any event, I've done the total of the year was 6 funerals, including my sister-in-law, my beloved sister-in-law in September. I lost my day job in March. The spiritual work is part of my calling and my soul work, but my day job of 42 years came to an end in March because of COVID. So there was a lot of trauma, not as bad as others, and certainly not anything to complain about. But what I found is that if I allowed that energy to just flow through me, experience when it happened, and move forward, that my life is okay, that I'm okay, and that everything seems to unfold according to some kind of plan. I can't tell you who created the plan or the mechanism behind it, but ultimately everything is working.
Absolutely. And part of that is letting go of your own plans, right? I'm so sorry to hear about all those losses. And of course, losses are compounded. Grief is compounded. If you had suffered those losses over the course of 10 years, you would be having a different experience than suffering them all in 1 year. And again, we can't know what that looks like. My stepfather lost his ex-wife and daughter in the same year. They both died. And he ended up quitting being a minister because he just couldn't do it anymore after those losses. And so he also lost his vocation. And that's just an illustration, like your life, like his life, like my life. It looks totally different now than it once did. The losses have transformed it, but we have to let go of what the future will be.
Absolutely. And what I found in my personal experience, and I can't speak for everyone, but that when one door closes, another one opens.
Absolutely. Opportunity comes, and there have been some good things, much as it might be hard to admit at times. There are always good things that come out from tragedy.
What would you like readers to take away from getting through it?
I would like readers to take away from getting through it just the idea that even if a solution is unsolvable, a problem will never be solved, you can heal the trauma of it and feel okay. The healing is not necessarily in your body or in your job or your life or your marriage. The healing is inside yourself. And even people who are facing an outcome that is 100% negative can find peace within themselves.
And as you shared before, you said my little slogan here in my Skype account, the lyrics of Stevie Winwood, "Heaven is in your mind."
Yes.
My guest, Dr. Alexandra Chauran, she's the author of Getting Through It, Reclaim and Rebuild Your Life After Adversity, Change, or Trauma. Alex, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you and your work.
Thank you. You can find more about me and my work by talking to me through Twitch. I stream 5 days a week at Queen of Diamonds on Twitch. You can find me through my website address, seepsychic.com, cpsychic.com. And you can find my books wherever books are sold. So I very much encourage you to try to patronize your local bookstores. They're hurting during this economic crisis, and they would love to special order my book if they don't have it on their shelves already.
Absolutely. Alex, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of this wonderful information.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.